Okay, I know I made like 4 videos on VR already, but you know what? I'll make another one because this topic has been bothering me for a while now. You see, I've been fascinated with VR for like a decade at this point, ever since the first Oculus Rift was announced. Like, I even remember trying it at a convention back in like 2013 or 2014 or something like that, and thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And I've always thought this technology was going to be revolutionary, especially in video games. But as time goes on, this sector of the gaming industry just refuses to take off. It's gotten slightly better over the years, but it's still nowhere near where I want it to be, and that pisses me off. Because seriously, why is the VR game market so thin? Why doesn't everyone and their grandma have a VR headset lying beside their computer ready to be used? We've had the technology for over a decade after all. Fortunately, we know what's been going wrong, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. Pricing has been a pretty big issue with VR setups. You see, when the Oculus Dev Kit launched in 2013, it had pretty reasonable system requirements and a price of only about $300. The problem is that not many people got their hands on one, and the ones that did usually paid a lot more than $300 for it. Hell, even I remember seeing them be sold online for like $700. Other companies took note of this and started releasing all these $600, $800, $1,000 plus headsets that are still being put out to this day, which nobody's buying because even though their specs are amazing, there's simply not enough content for it to be worth the price tag. It didn't help that most people had to upgrade their graphics card to a 1060 or higher in order for these headsets to work properly. And this problem extends beyond PC VR because console VR is more or less the same way. The first PSVR was priced at the same level as the console itself, and they made it worse with the second generation by making it more expensive than the console it was designed for. Luckily, pricing isn't as much of a nightmare anymore because currently the second most popular graphics card on Steam is VR ready, plus the Meta Quest 2 goes only for like $300, which is about the cost of a nice gaming monitor. But that gives rise to another issue. Why would I spend $300 on a VR headset to play half a dozen games when I can put that money towards a gaming monitor that plays thousands? And that leads me to my next point. The VR game market is ridiculously small. In 2020, Valve dropped Half-Life Alyx thinking this is going to be the big break for VR, and now every major developer is going to go full throttle into developing VR titles. Kinda like how when Avatar came out in 3D, everybody else also started making 3D movies. Yeah, unfortunately it did not turn out the way they hoped. To this day, there are barely any AAA titles with VR support, and even fewer natively meant to be played in VR. There's a fair share of indie titles out there, but most of them are sandboxes and glorified tech demos. But that begs the question, considering that VR has gotten decently affordable in the last couple of years, and the Quest 2 sold 20 million units, why aren't big studios investing in it? Why can't I play Far Cry 6 in VR? Why can't I play the latest Call of Duty campaign in VR? Or Dying Light 2? Or Ghostwire Tokyo? Any first-person game can theoretically be given a VR mode, but for some reason, it's not happening. And I know you guys are going to say, mods, dude, what about mods? Just install mods and everything will be fine. But that's the thing, I want it to be something official. First of all, because official stuff runs better. Second of all, because official support is how you get the attention of other developers. Mods usually do not convince developers to invest in new things. There's been a few cases where it happened, like how Counter-Strike originally started off as a Half-Life mod, but that's rare, especially considering Valve is one of the only companies willing to do that type of thing. You think any other big-name developer is going to notice or care that somebody Frankenstein together a VR mod for their game? Give me a break. Capcom can't even be bothered to port their official Resident Evil VR modes onto PC despite there being no more exclusivity deals, likely because they don't see many other big developers making VR games, so they just don't care. They made this VR mode because Sony paid them to do it, and then they just forgot about it. And speaking of that, the fact that VR content is spread across different platforms is actually also a problem because of how few good VR titles are currently available. It's not like your typical flat screen games where no matter what platform I have, I'll have thousands of titles to choose from. With VR, the amount of good titles can be literally counted on one hand, meaning that if I want to have more than like 2 good games, I'll have to buy multiple headsets from multiple platforms. This is actually the main thing keeping me from buying a VR headset right now because I don't want to buy multiple headsets to play a couple good games. I want to be able to buy one headset and have all those games on it. The VR market is in this weird like catch-22 situation where it's small because companies won't invest in it, and companies won't invest in it because it's small, and the ones that have invested in it don't get very far. It's kind of disappointing how many times companies have tried to popularize VR and failed. Remember the Google Cardboard? It was a nice concept, being able to have VR without spending tons of money. Hell, even I have one of the plastic ones. They even took it a step further at one point and released fancier ones with extra features, which is cool and all, except it all died out within a couple years because mobile VR is simply not a great product. A lack of controllers and 6-axis rotation meant that you had a glorified Viewmaster 3D with crappy Unity games that got boring in 10 minutes. Nintendo Switch VR never took off for the same reason. But it's not always the hardware that's underwhelming. I'm sure you guys have heard of the Metaverse, aka Mark Zuckerberg's VR Utopia Life Simulator thing. It's basically just a more boring corporatized VR chat. And to be honest, that kinda sucks, because if any of you guys saw Ready Player One, it would be awesome to have a polished VR world like the Oasis where people hang out and play games and stuff. Honestly, it would be great if a lot of VR stuff got improved. But how do we go about accomplishing that? we need to see more investment into the VR industry. Sony is taking a step in the right direction by trying to pay companies to port VR games to their platform. If Meta can't make a decent VR communication platform, they should be doing this instead. Hell, they already did it with Resident Evil 4, so they should just keep going in that direction. Valve should also be doing the same thing because it will help them boost sales of the Index. We also need to have more affordable VR options because the Quest 2 is great, but not everybody wants to buy Facebook stuff that could potentially spy on you. Why hasn't Xbox made a headset of their own yet? If they push one out for say $250 or $300, they'll be able to sell a ton of them and get the upper hand above Sony. And to be honest, the technology as a whole could use some improvements. Something needs to be done to reduce nausea and fatigue in lots of VR users. Headsets should get better weight distribution like the new HTC One and weight reduction in general. Maybe in the future we could see more senses being simulated than just sight and sound. Also, stationary movement needs to be figured out somehow because moving around in a small square in your room is pretty restrictive, and using joysticks for teleportation isn't exactly immersive. But hardware improvements is a long-term goal. What needs to happen in the short term is better pricing and better support. And yeah guys, that's the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy, please do consider hitting that like and subscribe button. As always, this is your captain speaking. Peace out.